Today, we're diving into a policy shift that sounds like a dream, maybe, for students and teachers, but has administrators, well, pulling their hair out. The 4 day school week. Does shaving an entire day off the calendar actually work?
It's the big question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's definitely not just theoretical anymore. This isn't some small pilot program. Our sources, they confirm the 40SW has been adopted by over 2,100 schools. That's across more than 850 districts.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and while it started mainly in, small rural areas, maybe looking for savings, it's now pushing into suburban and even urban regions too.
So our mission today is really to cut through the noise. We've got quantitative data, qualitative data from major multi-state analyses ran, the Etchi DCO Institute, places like that. And what they seem to show is this stark clash between the intention and the reality on the ground.
Exactly. The central tension is just unavoidable. You have proponents betting on, significant cost savings, better staff
You have
recruits.
operational side.
Right. And then critics who fear the inevitable consequence of losing essentially 20% of instructional time. They worry it means lower test scores, learning loss. We really have to analyze these mixed findings because the answer for you, the listener, it kind of depends entirely on which metric you care most about.
So if you're trying to understand the actual mechanics of this fast-growing educational model, this deep dive is for you, especially where the hard numbers maybe challenge those initial, more optimistic assumptions. So let's unpack the first reason districts even consider this change. The cold, hard operational drivers, money and personnel.
Yeah, cost savings is usually the headline benefit, right? Districts typically look at the 40SW model as, well, a necessary measure sometimes to deal with budget constraints, maybe after years of flat funding or revenue shortages.
But the reality of those savings, I get the sense it's often hugely disappointing compared to what they hoped for or budgeted for. What's the delta there?
It's massive sometimes. Research calculates that the maximum potential cost savings for a district running a 4-day week, it's about 5.43% of the total budget.
Okay, that's the ceiling.
That's the absolute ceiling, theoretically. But the actual reported average savings, they typically range from a pretty negligible 0.4% up to only about 2.5%.
Wow, zero point 0.4 to 2.5% versus a potential over 5%.
Exactly. The gap between the maximum potential and the average reality is just huge.
So why can't they hit that 5% mark? It seems intuitive, you cut a day. But it's not like they're cutting teacher salaries, right? That's a key point.
Absolutely not. Teacher salaries, which are, the largest chunk of any school budget, have to remain the same. The number of hours teachers work is compressed, not really reduced. They still meet their required contractual time.
So where do the savings actually come from them?
It's the operational expenses, things like reduced spending on fuel and transportation fin. One study noted a 15% drop there, which is significant. Utilities, food services, and a big one is substitute teachers. Some districts saved up to 20% just on substitute costs because teachers aren't out as much.
Okay, when you put it like that, even a small percentage gain, like 0.5% or 1%, it can still be a lifeline for a struggling district. The sources had a great example. One district achieved, what was it, just 0.7% savings?
Yeah, it just sounds tiny.
But that amounted to $7 million for them. And that was enough money to retain 70 teachers in a tight budget year. So that tiny percentage change can completely redefine a district's solvency, can't it?
It really can. It lets the administration make a fundamentally different choice than, say, massive layoffs. And that shifts our focus right to the second key operational driver, personnel, specifically recruitment and retention.
Yeah, and this is particularly acute in rural areas, isn't it? Where a lower pay scales, remote locations,
Yeah.
it creates these chronic staffing crises. They just can't compete.
Correct. So the 4-day week becomes this really crucial non-salary benefit they can offer.
Yeah.
And the qualitative reports from principals, especially in those rural communities, they're overwhelmingly positive when it comes to recruitment.
I found the anecdotal evidence really compelling. Principals reporting a significant surge in their applicant pools right after the switch. One administrator mentioned an opening that usually drew maybe 18 to 20 applicants, suddenly pulled in 80.
80, yeah. That's 4 times the interest, pretty much just because of the schedule. It gives them a negotiating chip, something beyond just salary. Administrators noted they felt they were no longer just a stepping stone district, where new teachers come, get experience, and then jump ship.
They can actually attract talent who really value that longer weekend.
Exactly. They can hold on to people.
But here's where it gets a bit murky again, right? While the attraction numbers, the anecdotes look great, the hard quantitative research on long-term retention is much more cautious. Does the schedule actually make teachers stay longer year after year?
Not reliably, it seems. Teachers certainly feel happier. We'll get to that.
Yeah.
But the research suggests the schedule doesn't reliably boost long-term staying power across the board. Some studies show only negligible reductions in job exits. However, there's a really interesting piece of data from Missouri rural districts. Their analysis found no significant change in the average years of experience between teachers in 4-day versus 5-day schools.
So what's the takeaway there?
Well, the takeaway seems to be the 4DSW might not reliably increase retention by huge amounts, but critically, the data suggests it doesn't hurt it either, at least not in those contexts.
That makes sense. I mean, if you attract more qualified people in the first place and the schedule doesn't immediately make them leave, you're probably still better off overall, right?
That seems to be the calculation many districts are making.
And this brings us right into the human factor.
Hmm.
Morale, satisfaction, quality of life. This is where the 4DSW seems to generate its most enthusiastic feedback.
Oh, absolutely. The perceptions here are almost universally positive. The sources show incredibly high satisfaction rates. We're talking up to 84% of families, and get this, 95% of students are in favor.
Wow, 95% of students. Not surprising, maybe.
Yeah, maybe not. But for teachers, the benefits move far beyond just having a long weekend. It seems to translate into real improvements in their professional life. They report increased staff morale, feeling more relaxed, less burned out, and decreased teacher absences.
Which circles back to those substitute savings we just talked about.
Exactly. It all connects. And what's fascinating is how teachers actually use that extra day. Many dedicate that Friday or Monday, whichever it is, to critical professional tasks. Things like better lesson planning, more detailed grading, collaboration with colleagues. They're effectively moving that admin work off their personal time.
They talk specifically about getting their Sunday back, right? I saw that quote.
That's the phrase. And that's a huge psychological win. It's not just morale. It's recovery time, better preparation. Plus, it allows for essential life logistics, scheduling doctor's appointments, dentist, other personal things, without needing to miss a school day and scramble for substitute coverage.
That's a practical benefit that's hard to overstate.
And we saw a key demographic confirmation of this preference too, that Missouri data again. It showed that teachers who are also parents prefer the 4-day week at a significantly higher rate, like 97.7% favorability.
Nearly unanimous for parents.
Compared to non-parents, who are still overwhelmingly in favor, but at 89.4%. So that benefit of aligning the schedule with family needs seems really palpable for parent teachers.
Okay, that's a lot of positive on the human side for teachers. But we need to pause here and address a really significant operational and, frankly, ethical downside of this cost-saving model. The advantages for salaried teachers often seem to come at a heavy cost for hourly, non-instructional staff.
Yes, this is a crucial point, and it often gets overlooked in the headlines. The 4DSW inherently disadvantages support staff. Think cafeteria workers, bus drivers, classroom aides.
People paid by the hour.
Exactly. Since they work 1 day less, they inherently lose a full day's pay each week. And for those often working close to minimum wage already, that reduction in hours can mean a serious loss of pay. Sometimes it even affects their eligibility for benefits, creating real financial distress.
That creates a major ethical hurdle for administrators, doesn't it? You're potentially solving the teacher staffing crisis, saving some operational money, but you might be doing it by negatively impacting your lowest paid employees.
It's a serious trade-off. And the qualitative data noted that this does create negative perceptions and worry among some teaching staffs. They feel conflicted about their own benefits coming at the expense of their colleagues.
So it turns a recruitment win into a potential equity challenge internally.
It really does. It necessitates careful planning. Often administrators need to find creative solutions, maybe ways to keep those support staff employed or compensated through other means on that off day, if possible.
Okay, let's move now to maybe the most contentious section, the academic report card. After we've talked about morale and money, the ultimate measure has to be student learning, right? Is the 4-day schedule negatively impacting achievement?
Overall, yes. The big picture findings from the multi-state studies are generally concerning on this front. When comparing 4DSW students to their 5-day peers, the trajectory tends to show slightly lower test scores over time. There's little consistent evidence of large positive academic effects across all types of districts.
Okay, let's zoom into K-8 first. That's where achievement testing is usually most consistent. What does the data tell us about math and reading for younger students?
Well, the multi-state data, and particularly studies out of Oregon, they suggest a small to moderate negative impact on both math and reading achievement. They often report these standardized score declines, somewhere between -0.02 and -0.07 standard deviations, or SD.
Okay, wait, let's quickly translate that. What does a, say, narrow 0.05 SD drop actually mean in practical terms for student learning?
Yeah, good question. Think of it this way. A decline of that magnitude, say -0.05 SD, it means those students tested slightly lower. It's roughly equivalent to maybe losing a couple of weeks of learning time compared to their peers on a traditional 5-day schedule.
Okay, so it's small, but it's measurable and consistent in those studies.
It is. And the research also points out that reading often seems to suffer a bit more than math on the shortened schedule.
Why would reading suffer more? Does that suggest maybe students are losing that crucial foundational literacy time, which maybe needs more constant repetition, more than they are losing computational practice time?
That is precisely one hypothesis, yeah, that maintaining consistent exposure to literacy skills might be more vulnerable to time loss than, say, the specific longer block periods often used for math instruction in these models. But importantly, this negative pattern seems highly dependent on where the school is located.
Right, the locale split. That seems to be the key variable everywhere we look in this research.
Absolutely. In non-rural districts, those negative effects on K-8 achievement, often negligible or even non-existent in some studies. However, in rural districts, that negative trend tends to be more pronounced. Although, we have to mention a specific study in Colorado which actually found the opposite.
Okay.
Yeah, it found increased math and reading proficiency rates for 4th and 5th graders in their 4-day schools. So conflicting evidence. And then there's the Missouri data we keep coming back to.
Which complicates the picture even further, I imagine.
Exactly. Their analysis of MAP scores, those are the measurement of academic progress tests. It showed no significant change in English language arts or math achievement scores. Not 1 year, 2 years, or even 3 years after adoption.
So it didn't significantly help achievement in those Missouri districts, but it didn't cause a measurable decline either.
Correct. At least based on those standardized tests over that time frame.
So essentially what the data seems to tell us is that adopting this model without really deep tailoring to your specific community, the grade levels involved, the subjects, it's basically a roll of the dice in terms of academic impact.
That's a really good synthesis, I think. Now, if you look at high school outcomes, especially attainment, the achievement picture, test scores, it remains mixed. That Oregon study suggested a math score increase in rural high schools, but guess what? Their non-rural high schools saw a decrease in math scores.
Again, that rural-non-rural split is huge, but the attainment numbers, like graduation rates, those are the real shocker here, suggesting a pretty profound regional divide in long-term outcomes.
They showed dramatically opposing trends. It's quite striking. Rural high schools in Oregon saw improved graduation rates, specifically up to an 11.1% increase in the 5-year graduation rate.
That's a massive improvement.
Huge. Conversely, non-rural high schools in that same study, they saw significant decreases in graduation rates, down by 7.5% in their 5-year rates. So the local context, especially at the high school level, seems to be an enormous variable here.
Okay, let's pivot now to behavioral implications, because the studies here actually offer some perhaps surprisingly positive data on school climate.
That's right. Studies focusing on Oklahoma high schools, for instance, found that switching to the 40SW probably resulted in a noticeable reduction in negative disciplinary incidents. Things like less bullying reported, less fighting, fewer incidents on school buses.
Interesting.
Yeah. And it also likely reduced substance use, truancy, and weapons incidents, apparently with little to no effect on vandalism rates.
That sounds like a pretty clear positive shift in the school environment, maybe because students and teachers are just more refreshed, less stressed.
It certainly suggests improved school climate, yes.
Yeah.
But we have to acknowledge the counterpoint immediately. There was one study, this one looking at high schools in rural Colorado, that suggested a 40SW might correlate with an increase in the overall crime rate, property crime rate, and specifically crime that happens not at school.
Ah, okay. That's a vital connection to make them. The reduction in school-based crime might be offset, or more than offset, by an increase in neighborhood or community-based issues. Maybe if students are unsupervised on that extra day off.
Precisely. And that potential lack of supervision also plays into attendance. Does the extra day off reduce student absences the way it seems to reduce teacher absences?
Well, RAND found no quantitative evidence of overall attendance improvement, did they?
No. The findings are pretty inconsistent overall, and again, often tied to locale. The data showed mixed effects. Some studies indicated maybe a decrease in absences in non-rural areas, but possibly a probable increase in absences in large rural areas and high schools.
Why would that be?
Well, the thinking is that the motivation for that 4-day weekend might lead some students, especially older ones, to take the occasional Monday or Friday off as well, extending their break.
Makes sense. The structural change also introduces that challenge of the longer school day, doesn't it? Needed to meet the required instructional hours.
Yes, and it creates significant pacing issues for teachers. Longer days can be incredibly difficult, especially for the youngest students, elementary grades. Teachers noted that students get visibly restless, describe them as antsy and kind of done pretty early in the afternoon, maybe around 2 p.m.
Yeah, I can picture that.
And this can lead to behavioral peaks later in the day and probably reduce quality of instruction during those last couple of hours.
Okay, this brings us then to what the HEDCO Institute highlighted as two critical, sort of unanswered questions.
Wow.
Logistical hurdles that really define whether this model succeeds or fails long term. The first is about instructional time integrity.
Right. We've established that time is often preserved on paper by making class periods longer. But the question is about the quality of that time. Is a single, longer block of math instruction, say 75 minutes, as effective as maybe two shorter, spaced sessions? And are schools truly maintaining the same total instructional hours in practice? Any loss of high-quality learning time inherently risks learning loss, regardless of what test scores might say a year or two out.
That makes sense. And the second critical question, it addresses that massive vacuum created on the fifth day. This connects directly back to the crime and attendance data we just reviewed. What do students actually do when they're not in school?
This is arguably the greatest long-term equity logistical hurdle of the whole model. Families, especially lower-income families, face immense challenges finding affordable, enriching childcare for that extra day. Furthermore, for students who are food insecure, who rely on school meals, they may lack access to sufficient food on that off day. The burden is essentially shifted from the school system to the community and the family.
And without the community infrastructure there to support it, affordable programs, safe places the 4DSW risks just exacerbating socioeconomic disparities, doesn't it? Students whose parents can afford enrichment or supervision are fine, maybe even benefit, but students who are left unsupervised or lack food access, they're potentially penalized for the district's operational choices.
Mitigation becomes absolutely essential. Community-supported programming, whether it's remedial instruction offered by the school itself, maybe partnerships with youth programs, accessible childcare, or even just ensuring adequate home supervision that becomes necessary to mitigate those potential negative impacts on student development and well-being. Leaving that day truly empty, with no plan, seems to be where the biggest risks really lie.
So if we try to synthesize all this data, the financial pressures, the clear boost to teacher morale, the definite cost to support staff, the very mixed academic outcomes, and this big fifth day vacuum, what's our final conclusion? Where does this leave us?
Well, the synthesis, I think, is that the 4DSW is a highly effective operational tool for addressing severe staffing shortages and drastically improving staff morale. That seems clear. Particularly in high-need rural districts where maybe the trade-off is teacher retention versus a small academic dip they feel they can manage. The perceived benefits for personnel, for teachers, and often students and families are real and overwhelmingly high. However,
There's always a however.
there's always a however. Those operational wins seem to be purchased at the risk of small to moderate negative academic effects, especially for K-8 students in core subjects like math and reading, and by potentially increasing the burden on the lowest paid staff and on economically disadvantaged families if that fifth day isn't carefully managed.
So ultimately, the question of whether 4 equals 5, it depends entirely on what a district or a community is prioritizing. Is it fiscal and staff health, or is it those academic performance measures? Because the sources really suggest you can't fully optimize both simultaneously, at least not under the current common versions of this model.
That seems to be the core trade-off. And this raises, I think, a really important final question for you, the listener, to consider. Since the research pretty consistently shows that implementing the 4-day school week without formal, equitable fifth-day programming, things like remedial instruction, community youth programs, risks negative impacts on student development and well-being, how much responsibility should schools and local governments actually assume in ensuring equitable access to enriching activities on that day off if they choose to pursue the 4DSW model?
A deeply complex question. It moves the focus from just the school budget right into the heart of community obligation and equity. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the real cost and benefit of a long weekend.